Right then guys, so this is going to be video number 2 on the Redwolf, and in this video we're going to be rebuilding it. So I've made a couple little improvements inside the block. Very minor, there's hardly anything mechanical going on with the Redwolf, so there's not much that needs to be polished. Right then, before we begin, if you require any O-rings for the Daystate Redwolf, you can buy a complete O-ring kit from the Daystate website. It is a little hard to find, but just Google Daystate Redwolf O-rings and you should find the official site. They do only sell it in a bag like this, so you have to dig around for the ones you want, but it does include every single O-ring on the rifle. So we're going to start where we left off with the bolt, and we're just going to start putting stuff back together. First on is the battery connection. That just goes in this plug here. These plugs are handed, so they will only fit in one way. We'll stick the insulating plate back on, and then we can bring back the trigger plate. So I'm going to put the safety in first, and that's into this plug here. And then we need to route the wires behind the trigger plate. So the battery one goes behind, and then the safety ones are looped around the back. This just stops them interfering with the trigger. The trigger one does go over, it can't go under. So we're going to route it like so, and then plug it in at the front here. With that done, what we'll do is put the rear plastic piece back on. Again, just making sure none of the wires are pinched. And then whilst lining up the holes from this side, we can start putting the screws in. They are a little fiddly to get them to line up, but once you've got one in, it's normally pretty easy to get the rest sorted. With the screws on, we can now put the trigger back on, being mindful of the little spring of course. Then once the trigger's on, we can just do up these two screws here. That's with a 3mm Allen key. Right then, that's most of the bolt rebuilt. We will leave the top cover off, as we will need to get the pressure sensor and the coil back attached, but that's pretty much it there. For those of you with programmers, this little socket down here is where you'd install your programmer and do all your programming. There's a very good post on Airgun Nation by Spray One Mark, in which he details the programmer procedures for FAC rifles. Well worth a read, but for now this can be stuck to one side. So here we are back with the block, and to save a little time, what I've done is I've replaced all the O-rings on each of the components. I can't really give you sizes, and it is a bit of a guessing game to sort of find which one's which, so I thought I'd spare you from that. Okay then, so we'll start from the front here, and I'm just going to add a little bit of silicone grease to each of the O-rings. Someone did ask for a sort of a lubrication guide for air guns, so I will be making that video soon. But for now, we'll just put some silicone grease on it, and then it can be reinserted in the rifle. At this point we might need to make sure it's lined up, so just nudge it gently into place. Then we can start dropping back in the magazine indexing system. So first it's a little O-ring. Let's get that in the seat down there. Then it's the little steel cup. Then the little indexing pin, and the little indexing pin goes in this way down, so long side down. Then a spring goes over the top, and then finally it's capped off with the little plate. Then the two countersunk screws can be done up with a 2mm Allen key. Do need to do these up quite tight to stop them from coming loose, but obviously you're only screwing into brass, so don't do them up super tight, otherwise you'll strip the threads in the valve. On some rifles I have noticed that these come loose a lot quicker than others, so you may benefit from just putting a little dab of blue Loctite in them if you find yours coming loose too often. And what I like to do at this stage is just put the trigger on and put the bolt in the top there. This is only for a test run, and we will be taking it out again in a minute. But what this ensures is that the valve is nice and upright. If it's not upright, the screw will bind as it goes in. So screwing this on now just gives us a little bit of control, and if we need to we can always undo these screws a little and it will pull itself straight. But I'm quite happy with that, it goes in nice and easily. Doesn't bind as it starts to go in, so we're going to leave it as that. Next we're going to reinstall the valve pin, and I'm just going to put a little bit of silicone grease on this as it does run through an O-ring. And that can be pushed in. As you can see there, I've given the end of the spring a little polish, and now we can reinstall our front valve. Now this has a bit of a trick to it, so I'll show you that as it goes on. But first, a little bit of silicone grease around these O-rings. Now the trick is to be very, very careful with this face here. Sometimes these can have a little burr on them, so as the O-rings go in you need to be very careful that you don't push too hard and tear the O-rings. So what I like to do is get it started, and then with a gentle amount of pressure and a wiggling back and forward motion, just gently push the O-rings through, like that. And then we can reinstall the screws and do them up with a 4mm Allen key. I like to get them all started and almost all the way done before I tighten them up, as that ensures that the front block's in the correct orientation. I just stick the two in the back there. Right then, now we can just go round and nip the screws up. These bolts do need to be done up quite tight. Obviously remember you're only going into aluminium, so just be mindful of that. Now we can turn our attention to the back and start reassembling everything back here. So first of all, our little reinforcing plate goes back in, and that just drops in the bottom there, like that. Then the coil goes in the rifle this way with the wires out the back. So wires to the back. Give that a gentle push. Then once it's in, you need to feed the wires back through. Like that. Next we'll put the little spacer piece in, and this cutout here just aligns with the wires, like that. Then it's the little O-ring that just goes in the back, like so, and then the hammer and the little return spring go on. They are in the back there. Then we can cap that off with a safety. Now we need to switch the rifle to fire and then pull down this little rod that allows the safety to drop in. So I'll just put my little hex head back in, and these are just direct replacements for the little anti-tamper ones that are normally fitted. Now because these screws absorb the recoil action from the hammer, it is good to put a little bit of blue Loctite on these screws to stop them vibrating loose. You don't want tons on there, you just want enough to hold it. Right then, we'll stick the block to one side for a second and we'll bring back the cocking handle and pellet probe. Right then, so we need to put this assembly back together, and it's pretty simple. We're just going to add some moly grease to this spring, just a small amount, just so it's nice and lubricated in the hole. And then we're just going to add a little to the hole itself. Right then, we'll stick the spring back in, and that just goes in a little hole back there, like that. Then there's a ball bearing to be dropped on top, so we'll just drop that on, and then we can reinstall the arm. So this is the part that I've given a little polish, just so that the ball runs nicely on these faces here. And again, just going to put a small smear of grease on both of these faces and install it like so. Before we go any further, I am just going to put a little bit of blue Loctite inside the threads, just so as we put the little screw in, it's got some thread lock on the threads. Doing it this way round to stop thread lock from getting in between the little joint here and causing us a problem. Then we'll line the hole up like so, push the screw through, and then do it up. With that part done, we can reinstall the pellet probe, and I'm just going to add a small smear of grease along this face here, top and bottom, as this part does rotate in the pellet probe. And then we'll reinstall our little screw, again just using a flat bladed screwdriver. Doing it up nice and tight. Now I didn't put any Loctite on this one because there is no load on it, so it's not likely to come undone, but I did put Loctite on this one as there is a constant load on the screw, so over time it may work loose, and that constant load is caused by the spring and the ball bearing in there. Right then, here we are back at the block, and we're going to put the pellet probe assembly back in. So there is a couple of balls in here and a spring, so there's a little bit of a juggling act to get it all to stay in properly. So first off, we're going to put the big ball back in this hole here. I don't know if you can see it there, but it fits in that hole there, and we're going to flick it to safe, and that ball, and when we flick it to safe, that ball disappears into the action. Next we're going to put the smaller ball and spring in this rearmost hole here, and before that goes in, I'm just going to add a very small amount of grease to it. Give it a rub in. You only want a really small coating on this, it's not a high pressure item. So we'll stick the ball in first, then the spring. This is a little tricky to do for the camera. There's the spring, there's the ball in, then the spring goes on top of the ball. So we'll stick that in. Just give it a nudge down. And then finally, before we put the pellet probe on, we need to stick the little cover piece on. So we'll do that first. In from this side with a 2mm Allen key. And just nip the two screws up in the base there. Those ones there. So what I've done is I've just put a little bit of grease around the pellet probe, just so it's got a nice little bit of lubrication to it, and I've also put some grease on this face here for the safety ball to run in. Not forgetting the steel bush in the rear of the arm. So we'll just put that in the back there. So we'll just slide that in like so, and then do this little screw up, and that's with a 3mm Allen key. And there it is there. Right then, now we're going to reattach the ball to the rifle. So I'll bring the ball back, and first thing we're going to do is reinstall the pressure sensor into the board. So we just reinstalled the pressure sensor, and now we're going to reinstall the coil. So I like to use a toothpick just to guide the connections in, something non-metallic obviously. And then once the connections are in, we can just do up the terminal connections. Now this plate's only soldered on, so if you do them screws up too tight, you're just going to break the solder joint. So they need to be just nipped, and that's good enough. Next thing we've got to do is just guide the trigger plate into the little cutout for it, whilst also making sure that the safety at the back here is properly engaging. Once it's find its seat, we can do the screw up, and at this stage we can check and make sure the safety is functioning correctly, which it is on my rifle. It was before I took it apart, so it'd be surprising if it wasn't now, but it's working nicely. And now we can put the cover on over the other side. Now, when reinstalling this cover piece, you've got to make sure that the wires fall into the correct cutouts. You don't want to be pinching these thin wires, so just be careful as you put it back on. If the wires need a little bit of guiding, you can just poke them with a cocktail stick to get them into the holes. Making sure as well as the battery one isn't pinched between the two halves. And there we have the board all buttoned back up again. Still need to reinstall the barrel and the shroud, but it's coming together now. So next we'll put in the barrel, and as always just adding some silicone grease to these O-rings at the front there. So the transfer port on this rifle needs to be down, and there's two indents on the barrel to align with these two grub screws here. And with a 2mm Allen key, tighten it down like that. Now I've got to reinstall my Picatinny rail before I can put the shroud back on, so I'm going to do that quickly. Right then, now I've put the Picatinny rail on, we can reinstall the shroud back, and that just slides over the barrel. And then the top two grub screws correspond with them two holes there. So push it over and do it up. They generally do find their position, and then we can slide back over the carbon sleeve. Then on the bottom there, just line up the carbon shroud with the two corresponding holes, one on each side. Then we can just put the two grub screws back in, like so, and that's done using a 2.5mm Allen key. Right then, that's the rifle pretty much rebuilt. At this stage, before it goes back in the stock, you would reattach your bottle and fill it up, make sure there's no leaks and that the board's operating correctly. And then once all that's been confirmed, you would then disconnect the battery, refit the action in the stock and go from there. So I'm going to reinstall my bottle, make sure there's no leaks, and then we'll turn it on. Right then, so I've had the rifle pressurised up for a couple hours now, not seen any leaks. The main source of leaks is normally either in the firing valve or between these two junctions here. The two O-rings in here are quite fragile, and sometimes when you push them in they can get nicked. That being said, this one's not leaking. So we'll reinstall the battery. Battery obviously does have a way round to it, and we see the display light up at the base here. Okay then, so this is the new software, and I thought I'd give you a little demo of it. So to enter the onboard menu, all you do is open the bolt and pull the trigger. Keep holding it until programming mode comes on, like so. You can see the new software version there, and then hold, let go of the trigger, then hold it again. Magazine size, power level, sleep timer, display timer, shot count reset. Then it just cycles. Then when you get your setting you want, so we'll do the shot count reset, just hit it to yes. You can change it with a trigger, yes, no, and then push it forward. So you saw there we had about 180 shots, we reset it to 0. So I'll just show you the other settings. Magazine size, power level, sleep timer, 15 minutes is standard, 30, 4 hours, 15 minutes. You can see the settings there, and each time you close the bolt it obviously saves the settings. You do have to do them one at a time, which is a little annoying. Display timer, so you can set how long the light up display lasts for, so 15 seconds off, always on. So you can have it to 15 seconds or always on. I'm going to leave mine at 15 seconds. Right then, so let's get this back in the stock. Right then, so putting the Redwolf back in the stock is probably the most awkward operation of the whole lot. The main problem is this battery wire. It likes to get tangled up and not play the game when you're trying to feed it down the grip. So, what I've found easiest, open the battery window and you're trying to feed the battery cable through this hole here. So I like to get it nice and straight before we start. Very difficult to show for the camera, this. You can sometimes feed it through with your little finger there. Before you push it all the way home, make sure that the battery wires has come out the bottom and doesn't feel really tight. I have seen them before now where they've been trapped in the stock and it's ended up damaging the wire. But I'm happy with that. The wire's nice and free and we can reinstall the stock bolt. Again, it's this big one and we're going to use an 8mm Allen key. Then when you want to put the battery back in, all you do is, I've found it's best to push the battery wire to the forward of the grip, put the battery in, and then you can reconnect them at your convenience. I'm going to leave mine unconnected for now, as I don't like to store the battery connected. I don't think it makes a difference, but it's just personal preference. Right then guys, I hope that's been interesting, or at the very least helpful. I hadn't seen a disassembly video of a Redwolf on YouTube before, so I thought I'd give it a crack. Anyway, thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next one.